A Memphis police officer in a gang rap video? That's what the department is investigating tonight. Meanwhile, that officer is off the job.
Ceppolito, two highly decorated former detectives, are set to go on trial next month, charged with the of 10 people. Committed on the orders of a vicious mob boss.
More city police officers were arrested on federal racketeering charges. Defendants were members of the Gun Trace Task Force.
I'm Sergeant Wayne Jenkins of the Gun Trace Task Force. I'm Sergeant Wayne Jenkins of the Gun Trace Task Force. Sergeant Wayne Jenkins of Gun Trace Task Force.
We've all heard stories about notorious gangsters, actions, dangerous lives, and the chaos they bring. But have you heard about cops who turn into the very gangsters they're supposed to be catching? Sometimes they end up doing even worse things than the criminals they chase. Let's start with this cop named Rafael Perez and his partner David Mack. And by the way, it turns out that Rafael Perez's story is actually the inspiration for Denzel Washington's character in the movie Training Day. Rafael Perez started out as a dedicated cop, committed to taking down and gang members. However, he ended up becoming a criminal and a gangster himself. When federal agents finally caught Perez, he exposed one of the biggest police corruptions in California's history. It all starts back in 1989, when Perez became a Los Angeles police officer at the young age of 22. Fresh out of the academy, he was eager to make a difference. After his rookie year, Perez, who went by Ray on the force, began working undercover in the narcotics team. This is where he was paired up with David Mack, a cop from Compton who had joined the LAPD just a year earlier. Perez and Mack were assigned to the buy and bust team. Their job was to go undercover, buy drugs on the streets, and then make arrests. They traveled all over the city, delving deep into the gritty underbelly of Los Angeles. They quickly became experts on how gangs and drugs operated throughout Southern California. They saw firsthand how these elements devastated the communities they were sworn to protect. In the beginning, they were genuinely committed to their mission. Perez's commanding officers recognized him as an honest cop who made clean arrests and managed to get hundreds of off the streets. There were no reports of misconduct involving Perez for the first few years. It seemed like he was on the right path, making a real difference in the fight against crime. However, things started to change in 1993, 4 years into Perez's career. The turning point came with a shooting incident involving David Mack and a drug dealer. According to Perez and Mack, the dealer had pulled a gun on Perez, threatening to shoot him. In response, Mack shot the dealer first, supposedly saving Perez's life. But eyewitnesses had a very different version of events. They claimed the dealer was unarmed and had only approached the police car. According to these witnesses, the dealer was shot once and then tried to run away, only to be shot again in the back, which ultimately killed him. Despite these allegations, both Perez and Mack denied any wrongdoing. Their version of the story prevailed, and they were found justified in their actions. In fact, David Mack was even awarded an LAPD Medal for heroism for supposedly saving Perez's life. Then, in 1995, after years of cleaning up the streets with exceptional police work, Rafael Perez got a big promotion. He was assigned to an elite undercover narcotics unit known as the Rampart Anti-Gang Crash Unit. Crash stood for Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums, and this unit was considered the best of the best when it came to dealing with gang activity. In this special unit, Perez's job was to track and monitor gang activities and gang membership. The officers in the Rampart unit patrolled an area just west of downtown Los Angeles. This place was teeming with people and home to at least 30 different gangs. The situation was intense, and the officers had their work cut out for them. Because they were working undercover, Rampart officers, including Perez, were allowed to wear plain clothes instead of standard police uniforms. This made them blend in more easily with the people they were monitoring. Perez, now without his old partner David Mack, was assigned a new partner in the Crash unit. Together, they were let loose on the streets to confront and try to control LA's gang problem. It was during this time that Perez started to change. He began dressing more like a gangster than a cop, adopting a style and attitude that mirrored those he was supposed to be chasing. He demanded respect from everyone he encountered. And if they didn't give it to him, there were consequences. Perez's background also gave him an edge. Being Puerto Rican, he spoke fluent Spanish, but many people assumed he was black and didn't realize he could understand them. This allowed him to gather a lot of insider information. He would often make arrests and then leave the suspects in the back of his police car to talk. Unknowingly, gang members and drug dealers would spill secrets about the neighborhood, information that only locals would know. Within just a few months of joining the Crash unit, Perez's path to corruption was set. His first step down this dark road came during a major drug bust. Perez and his partners seized a significant amount of money from a dealer and decided to keep some of it for themselves. This was the start of his rapid decline. He began stealing drugs and money from other dealers through illegal searches and seizures and would He beat anyone who tried to resist. Perez didn't stop there. He started framing gang members for crimes they didn't commit, planting fake evidence to ensure arrests. 2 gang members ended up in jail for 1 and 3 years respectively after Perez planted weapons on them. Despite their pleas of innocence and claims of being set up, their criminal backgrounds made their stories easy to dismiss. Perez's corruption went unchecked for a long time. He was a respected officer in the department, and because most of his victims had gang affiliations or criminal records, no one questioned his arrests. The courts found all his arrestees guilty and sent them to jail, reinforcing Perez's image as a tough and effective cop. With the money Rafael Perez raked in from his illegal activities, he was able to fund a lavish lifestyle. He remarried and settled down in a beautiful home in Los Angeles with his wife and daughter. His new wealth allowed him to move in higher circles and gave him the resources to keep dealing stolen narcotics. Perez would steal drugs from street dealers and pass them to his girlfriends to sell on the streets, turning a tidy profit in the process. But stealing from street dealers eventually was not enough for Perez. He wanted more. His ambitions led him to start pilfering drug evidence from police lockers. Initially, he took small amounts of but his greed soon grew. He began stealing pounds of the stuff, replacing the evidence with flour or Bisquick mix to avoid detection. This new operation significantly boosted his earnings and his audacity. While Perez was busy building his empire in 1996, he stayed in touch with his former partner David Mack. The two remained close friends, and Mack introduced Perez to Suge Knight, the CEO of Death Row Records. Knight was looking for off-duty police officers to serve as extra security. Perez jumped at the opportunity. On his days off from the LAPD, he worked as a private security guard for Suge Knight, further blurring the lines between his roles as cop and criminal. Perez had grown so comfortable breaking the law that he became careless, and this carelessness led to his downfall. On August 25, 1998, SWAT teams surrounded Perez's quiet suburban street and arrested him for stealing nearly $1 million worth of from an LAPD evidence locker. The police had become suspicious of the theft when they discovered that Perez had checked out the drug evidence using a false name. Months later, facing 12 years in prison for stealing police evidence, Perez decided to cut a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for immunity, he agreed to spill the beans on the widespread corruption within the LAPD's Rampart division. Over the course of 35 interviews, Perez revealed shocking details of officers planting evidence to secure convictions and using excessive force during arrests. He described how cops created false alibis for each other and intimidated neighborhood witnesses who had seen their misconduct. He even admitted that officers had attempted to potential suspects. Perez's confessions were extensive. He detailed so many crimes committed by himself and fellow officers that his testimony transcripts filled 4,500 pages. By the time Perez was finished exposing the corruption within the LAPD, 70 officers from the Rampart division were put under investigation. His revelations had far-reaching consequences. Victims across California had their cases re-examined, and over 100 wrongful convictions were overturned, setting the wrongfully imprisoned free. The fallout from Perez's testimony was immense. After the wrongfully accused were released, 140 lawsuits were filed against the Los Angeles Police Department, resulting in $125 million in payouts to the victims. The settlements ranged from $25,000 to as much as $15 million. Next up is a detective named Yvonne Robinson, who found herself on the wrong side of the law. In 2021, she was sentenced to 2 years probation for leaking confidential police information to a known gang member. But her story starts much earlier, back in 2013, when she was arrested and charged with conspiracy to obstruct justice. Yvonne Robinson got caught up in some serious trouble when it came to light that she was leaking sensitive information. It all came to a head when detectives recorded wiretap calls that caught Robinson talking to a suspect in a gang investigation. This suspect, Prentice Jones, who also goes by the name P. Nice, is a rapper from Long Beach. In these calls, Robinson told Jones that they needed to meet in person. Both Robinson and Jones were hit with felony conspiracy charges. Jones ended up pleading no contest in 2017 to the conspiracy charge and got sentenced to 3 years of probation. During the wiretap recordings, Jones casually referred to Robinson as the cop lady who kept him updated on ongoing police investigations into his gang's activities. In one particularly damning call, Jones talked about how Robinson allegedly fed him details about the investigation of Frank Castro Jr., who had been shot in Long Beach back in 2009. Detectives from the Long Beach Police Department, LBPD, had started to suspect that there was a leak in 2012. They picked up on this when they heard something suspicious on a recorded wiretap call. Realizing they had a mole, the detectives decided to keep this information within a tight circle while they tried to flush out the dirty cop who was feeding intel to the gang. To catch the leaker, the detectives came up with a clever plan. They published an internal report about an case involving several members of the Baby Insane Crips. Then they specifically notified Robinson about the investigation. The victim was a known police informant and had been a suspect in a case Robinson worked on years earlier. Detectives were careful with the report, omitting key facts to see if Robinson would take the bait. Sure enough, not long after viewing the report, Robinson contacted Jones and arranged to meet him at a house in North Long Beach. This action raised a lot of red flags. When detectives finally confronted Robinson with some tough questions about her interactions with Jones, she started to realize she was in serious trouble. Robinson tried to explain her actions by saying she was interrogating Jones about the case, but she never filed a report about their meeting, which looked really suspicious. Outside the courtroom, Robinson's defense attorney, Barnett, tried to downplay the situation. He admitted that Robinson made mistakes, but argued that her actions did not amount to conduct. Despite his defense, the evidence against Robinson was overwhelming.
Louis Eppolito, two highly decorated former detectives, are set to go on trial next month, charged with the of 10 people. Committed on the orders of a vicious mob boss.
Next up is the wild case of Louis Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa, two decorated detectives from the New York Police Department who took a dark turn. These guys, who spent most of their adult lives as respected members of the NYPD, ended up trading their badges for the fast cash of being mafia hitmen. They got involved in all sorts of illegal activities on behalf of the notorious 5 families of the American Mafia, mainly the Lucchese and Gambino crime families. They earned the infamous nickname Mafia Cops for their double lives. By 1985, federal authorities had these two on their radar, recognizing Caracappa and Eppolito as mafia associates in New York City. Their police work was already questionable, known for using inappropriate methods to get results. But their real descent into the underworld began when Lucchese family underboss Anthony Gaspipe Casso spilled the beans. Trying to get into witness protection in 1994, Casso revealed that he and his boss, Vittorio Vic Amuso, had paid Eppolito and Caracappa $375,000 in bribes and contracts starting in 1985. One of the most shocking stories from Casso involved the of James Heidel, a Gambino family associate. In 1986, Casso claimed that Caracappa and Eppolito, following orders from Casso and Amuso, Heidel and handed him over to be by Casso. This was supposedly in retaliation for an attempt on Casso's life, but the duo's deeds did not stop there. On Casso's orders, they Bruno Facciolo, a made member of the Lucchese family, with the help of Louis Didone. Facciolo was suspected of being an informant, and his murder became infamous because federal agents found a stuffed canary in his mouth at the crime scene, a clear message to other informants. The Mafia Cops were also involved in the murder of Gambino capo Edward Eddie Lino. On November 6, 1990, they pulled Lino over in his Mercedes-Benz and shot him 9 times. This hit was partially in retaliation for the 1985 of Paul Castellano, arranged by John Gotti. Things got really crazy in the mid-1990s when massive indictments hit nearly every crime family in New York. Caracappa and Eppolito decided to retire to Las Vegas, but even in retirement, they stayed connected to the mob. In 1993, Frank Lastarino contacted them to kill John Jr. Gotti, who had become the head of the Gambino family after his father was imprisoned for life in 1992. This plot failed, as did another to Lucchese family underboss Stephen Wonderboy Crea, due to indictments against the family. In the late 1990s, Caracappa and Eppolito even plotted to kill former Gambino underboss Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, who was in witness protection after testifying against John Gotti. They hoped to collect a reward promised by Gotti's brother Peter. However, Gravano was arrested and convicted of drug in 2003, landing him 19 years in prison. After a long and thorough investigation, including riveting testimony from Burton Kaplan, a businessman and career who was the link between Casso and the two detectives, Caracappa and Eppolito were arrested in March 2005. They faced a slew of charges: racketeering, obstruction of justice, extortion, and 8 counts of and conspiracy. These charges included the of James Heidel, Nicholas Guido, Israel Greenwald, John Otto Heidel, John Doe, Anthony Delapi, Bruno Facciolo, Edward Lino, and Bartholomew Borriello, as well as their involvement in the conspiracy to Gravano. The trial was dramatic, with Kaplan's testimony being particularly gripping. However, on June 30, 2006, a federal judge, Jack B. Weinstein, threw out their racketeering conviction on a technicality, citing the expiration of the 5-year statute of limitations on the key charge of racketeering conspiracy. But the story didn't end there. On September 17, 2008, a federal appeals court reinstated their racketeering convictions. As a result of the mafia cops' heinous actions, New York City ended up paying $18.4 million to settle 7 lawsuits brought by the families of their victims. On March 6, 2009, Louis Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa finally faced justice. Eppolito was sentenced to life in prison plus an additional 100 years, while Caracappa received life plus 80 years. Both men were also hit with fines exceeding $4 million. Caracappa ended up serving his time at the United States Penitentiary, Coleman in Florida, before being transferred to a federal prison in North Carolina. Unfortunately for him, he didn't get to serve much of his sentence. He died of cancer on April 8, 2017. Eppolito, on the other hand, was incarcerated at the United States Penitentiary in Tucson, a high-security federal prison. He managed to stick around a bit longer, but eventually passed away on November 3, 2019, while still in federal custody at a Tucson hospital. Now, if you thought the tale of the mafia cops was wild, wait till you hear about Joseph Miedzianowski. This guy takes corruption to a whole new level. Known as Chicago's most corrupt cop, Miedzianowski spent his career walking a very crooked line. He was a former Chicago Police Department officer who ended up being sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for racketeering and drug conspiracy. Miedzianowski wasn't just a corrupt cop. He was deep into the game, running a sales ring with street gang members and other shady police officers. Over his 22-year career, he racked up 59 citations for valor and arrests, and was publicly praised for his high number of drug and illegal weapon busts. But behind the scenes, he was playing both sides, leaking the identities of undercover police officers to gang members, extorting protection money from drug organizations, distributing crack cocaine, and even supplying gang members with ammunition. From around 1985 to 1998, Miedzianowski was knee-deep in all kinds of activities. He conspired to engage in racketeering that included distributing illegal drugs, extortion, money laundering, robbery, and bribery. He used his authority as a police officer to promote and protect these activities. For instance, he provided his co-conspirators with guns, shared confidential information like the identities of undercover officers, and tried to influence the outcome of cases. When it all came crashing down, Miedzianowski was convicted on 10 counts. These included conspiring to participate in racketeering activity, conspiring to distribute, and possess with intent to distribute more than 5 kilograms of over 50 grams of base, and unspecified quantities of and he was also found guilty of conspiring to commit extortion, using and carrying a firearm during and in relation to a or drug crime, distributing and base, wire fraud, possessing stolen ammunition, possessing a dangerous weapon, and possessing with intent to distribute.
The Memphis Police Department has confirmed that they received this video, and Officer Paris Glass, a 7-year veteran on the force, has been relieved of her duty pending an administrative investigation.
Next up, we've got the intriguing case of a Memphis police officer named Paris Glass, who found herself in hot water after allegedly appearing in a rap video by a local female rapper known as P. London. P. London is affiliated with the Avenue Pyru gang, and this whole situation caused quite a stir. According to P. London, Glass was not supposed to be in the video at all, and her appearance was just an editing mistake. Despite this claim, the music video, which was eventually pulled from YouTube, caused a lot of controversy because it depicted gang violence. In the video, there's a scene where a group of women and execute their rivals. Officer Glass is shown as one of the her face obscured by a red bandana, a symbol often associated with the Bloods gang. This portrayal was troubling, especially considering that a Memphis resident had already lodged a complaint alleging that Glass was leaking information from the internal police database to gang members. This incident only added fuel to the fire of concern over her involvement with the gang.
Officers on BPD's elite gun trace task force were convicted for racketeering, robbery, and overtime fraud. The officers admitting to flaunting and their power for almost 10 years.
Now, moving on to another explosive case, we dive into the Baltimore police corruption scandal. This scandal revolves around Sergeant Wayne Jenkins, who was once celebrated as a positive role model within the police force. Jenkins enjoyed immense respect and admiration from his superiors and was granted special privileges. His elite unit was viewed as a bulwark against chaos by senior commanders. However, the truth was far darker. Jenkins is now serving a prison sentence until January 2039. Jenkins was the ringleader of a corrupt task force that included 13 other officers. They were brought down on a laundry list of charges, including robbing citizens, stealing and selling drugs, falsifying reports and overtime, and attempting to cover it all up. The task force was accused of stealing over $300,000 in cash, kilos of drugs, and various other valuables. Embezzling from crime scenes is a common form of police corruption, but the sheer scale of this operation was unprecedented. What made this case even more notorious was the way these officers were scamming the department itself. Task force officers typically work off hours, as needed, and police their own work patterns. This system allowed the corrupt officers to claim enormous amounts of overtime even when they were doing personal errands like fixing their homes or vacationing in Myrtle Beach. The federal investigators could prove that these officers were not working during these times, which was just the tip of the iceberg. The task force's crimes extended far beyond financial fraud. These officers engaged in outright robbery and even sold their stolen goods back on the streets. In one shocking instance, they stole a man's house keys, looked up his address, and conducted an illegal search of his home. They found a safe filled with drugs and cash, took half the cash for themselves, and then reported the safe as if they were discovering it for the first time. During the previous year's riots, they stopped looters at a pharmacy, bagged the stolen goods, and sold them to their drug dealer contacts. They also sold drugs and a gun found in an illegal search. Perhaps the most egregious aspect of their operation was how they trapped innocent people. To legally stop and search someone, police need probable cause. The Freddie Gray case highlighted how contentious this could be, especially when the arrest was based on a technically legal knife. The Gun Trace Task Force took this a step further by manufacturing causes. They carried BB guns to plant on people if they needed to justify an arrest. They would also speed up their cars and drive at people, causing them to flee, which they then used as a reason to conduct a search. When targeting individuals, the task force wouldn't always make immediate arrests. They would monitor their targets for weeks, observing drug deals without intervening, waiting until they were close to a big score. They used illegal GPS trackers to follow suspects, bypassing the need for judicial oversight. Sometimes they didn't even bother with arrests. They would just rob their targets blind. In the end, the officers involved in this faced serious consequences. The lightest sentence handed down was 10 years, while Jenkins, as the ringleader, received a hefty 25-year sentence. That's it for today. Until next time, bye.